Thank you for taking the time to listen to our Business Network presentation call. I believe most of you know me, but if not, I'm Susan Muller, American Promise's National Business Network Manager. I'm looking forward to working with you to onboard values-driven business leaders to our National Business Network. Regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, we will work together on our common goal for the greater good to set reasonable limits on big money in our government. I am pleased to share our new Business Network presentation with you tonight. This presentation explains how unlimited spending in our government affects businesses and our economy. It explores our economic argument and how the unique and powerful business voice can support and move the needle to win our American Promise Amendment. Our target audience for this presentation is any local, regional, or national business association or organization, including all sizes and types of businesses. We have an urgent need to onboard business professionals in preparation for American Promise's Lobby Day, targeted in March of 2021. We are looking to have volunteers like you use this presentation to expand our national business network to secure business statement signers in every one of our 50 states, so we have business voices in all our Lobby Day meetings. So during the presentation that Scott's going to start in a minute, there are 2 planned spots to stop for conversations. But given our diverse and large Zoom audience tonight, we feel it's best if you put your questions in chat while Scott is giving the presentation. We will have an extended Q&A session at the end of the presentation with volunteers Joan DeVore and Elizabeth Doty, who have kindly offered to help facilitate questions. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Scott Ellis. Scott is a member of the National Business Network. He is not an American Promise staff member. Scott has graciously offered to present our deck, as we hope some of you will do in the coming months to help spread the word. Scott is the founder and CEO of Mastery Track and has been kindly referred to as a serial CEO. I have had the pleasure of working with and getting to know Scott as he signed our business statement to become a National Business Network member in mid-June. Take it away, Scott.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's get our sharing set up and make sure we've got it looking the way we want.
Passing the baton.
So, Susan, how's that look?
Excellent.
Very good. Well, so it's so nice to be with you all tonight. And Susan, thank you so much for inviting me to have a conversation tonight about, as you said, the business side of this story. And as we think about the role that money's playing in politics, it's really about the role money's playing in our society. And specifically the influence on not just the political side, but the marketplace. And so what we're really talking about tonight is, what does pay-to-play politics do in our economy, and how do we think about what to do to change that? So as Susan said, some folks do call me a sort of a serial CEO. I spent a number of years working at Hewlett-Packard, and I saw a little bit of this story of the role of money in politics and the influence on the business side in my time at HP. But really it's been, I think, probably like many of you over the last several years, watching the trajectory of politics in our country, and then especially the increasing amounts and influence of money and the role that it's playing in the political process, that really got me thinking about this issue and trying to think about how to get involved. And so as Susan said, like so many others, and tonight you'll see in the presentation the signing statements of several other business leaders who have also stepped in to join the business network and really think together about what we can do as a country to limit the role of money in politics and ensure we have fair process both in our democracy and in our economy. For me, and I think for many of us, the starting point really is, how would we like the economy to work? And I think most business professionals really think about a world where we compete in the marketplace based on the value we create for customers and for stakeholders. And so it really is about enabling those principles that I think have been part of American capitalism and our economy from its beginnings, to say this is a place where it's really about creating value in the economy. And that's what really determines which organizations succeed and which ones struggle. And that's what we're seeking and is best both for our companies and also for our customers. But I think as we look at the reality today, it's a different story. And again, this is something that I've been monitoring with increasing alarm over recent years. And as I look at this graphic, what I think about is many of us are out there trying to fish, right? We're trying to play the game we think we're playing, which is to compete successfully in the economy based on the value we create. When in fact, there are folks like the gentleman on the left-hand side of this graphic who are playing a different game and who are influencing the economy and also the democracy based on political contributions that they make, either as individual businesses or as other interest groups, with the goal of influencing regulation, or in some cases even court outcomes, and winning that way in the economy. And I think ultimately, as we think about the influence of this money, it's fundamentally that pay to play, as we call it, right? This role of using money to try and be successful in influencing the rules of the game is threatening the economic foundations of our country. And so as I think about the impact on business leaders and the business voice, it's really about talking about what's happening in this part of the conversation and bringing that to bear, in addition to thinking about what happens directly to the democracy. So how did this come about? And I think as I got to know this work and talk with Susan and with other members of the American Promise team, it was really helpful for me just to learn more about the history and what happened. Because I certainly heard about Citizens United and was more familiar with that, but I didn't realize how far back the roots of this phenomenon went. And so there are a number of Supreme Court cases over 40 plus years that have led in this direction. And so multiple cases talking about what is free speech, what are the limits for campaign contributions, what counts and what doesn't. And ultimately, as we look at this trend over time, it is a lot like the graphic on the right, where we see the magnification of the voices and influence of some individuals, which have an impact for the rest of society more broadly. And I think both for individual voters, but also for companies of different sizes that are trying to compete. But there really is a long history here that has led to the current structure for how money really plays a dominant role in our political system. And these are some of the results that we see. Even before this election played out, as again, getting to know this work and seeing the big numbers and the increases that were happening before, but when you look at the numbers for 2020, it in some ways dwarfs that change. But even before this most recent election, these are huge increases, right? These are all billion-dollar numbers. And so seeing the increases even from 2008 to 2012 has been really significant. But the bottom line is these are very large dollars, and the magnitude of the influence compared to the roles that many companies play in the economy is huge. And so when we think about where does the rubber hits the road, it's on this slide. When we talk about the magnitude of the dollars involved in shaping our democracy and our economy. And so what this then ends up causing in the individual companies, large and small, is an interest and frankly a need to be part of this process. And as we think especially about larger companies, but I think it affects companies of all sizes, as the quote says on the left-hand side, there is a legitimate argument that says, look, if you are in a company that's dependent on government or has implications for government practices and laws, which frankly is very many of us, a company that's dependent in that way, that doesn't donate to politicians, that doesn't engage in this, is not doing what it needs to do. And we can talk about whether corporate malpractice is too strong of a word, but I think it points in the right direction, which is, this is what it takes to be successful. And so companies have to keep their eyes open. And sometimes the phrase that I hear people use is, there's a bit of an arms race going on, which is, if these are how the rules work, and companies are doing this, this is what it takes to be successful. And so this is something that rises to this level in corporate decision-making. And as we talk about an example on the right-hand side, First Energy, which is a failing nuclear plant in Ohio, and talking about what happens and what kinds of actions are organizations taking, they put in a significant donation to influence the possibility of a bailout program, made the bailout program happen with huge dollars. And then even after the fact, as citizens gathered together to try and overcome this, the company was successfully able, again, through influencing the process, to preserve the bailout and get the result they needed. And so as we think about the big dollars in aggregate that I showed on the previous slide, what it eventually does come down to is individual companies making decisions and trying to think about how they're going to succeed. And of course, it's still about serving customers in the marketplace and the kind of competition I talked about at the beginning. But there is a whole nother side of the game that has to be played. And these implications are really huge for companies. And there's a return on this investment. And so the dollars are very big, both in terms of the kinds of funding that is provided and the benefits of that funding. And so especially as you look at large companies and the Fortune 100 companies, when we see the kinds of lobbying funds they spend yield huge results. And so when we talk about why is it that companies are doing this and why are they engaging in some of the pay-to-play activities, it's because there are real consequences. And having laws change, having regulations affected can yield huge benefits for lots of kinds of companies. The dollars here on this slide, obviously we're talking about billions of dollars for these companies, are huge. But this is a phenomenon that affects companies of all sizes. And so there is a return on this, which makes it even more important for us to think about how do we shape the rules of the game so we get the kind of economy that we want, one where companies compete based on value. And so when we think about the overall impact for small businesses, frankly, they get priced out. So if there are key regulations that affect the success of small enterprises, they're simply not going to have the kind of dollars they would need to be able to play this part of the game effectively. And so they're going to be priced out and not able to get a seat at the table. For medium-sized businesses, they may be able to play a role, but the dollars will be so large compared to the other aspects of their budget that they're really forced to make tough trade-offs between research and development and marketing and other key functional areas, other key investments they would make to help their companies succeed, which they may not be able to make because they need to focus on campaign contributions, lobbying, and other funds that will help them be successful. And then for large businesses, there are, of course, the financial aspects of this, right? Big dollars that we're talking about. But in addition, they end up in the spotlight. So many of these contributions are public, people know about these, and so there are reputational risk involved. Sometimes, again, we talk about the idea of pay to play. That doesn't feel great if you're on the side that needs to play that game. And so there are impacts in many ways for even those businesses that can participate and are not priced out. And then overall, when we think about the kinds of things these companies would invest in a fair game and where they would like to invest their resources, it's about things like innovation. And it's about investments that enable the most effective companies to succeed. And in an environment where that's what drives what succeeds, those who serve customers best, we get increased competition, right? American competitiveness, innovation. But when we have other uses of funds, it waters down our innovation and it reduces our competitiveness. And that's the kind of threat that we worry about from the business side as we think about the impact of these massive dollars in the political system. So as Susan mentioned, if we were all standing together in a restaurant or in a small conference room, I would ask you to turn to your neighbor and say, so what do you think? And how does this relate to what you've been experiencing? So we won't do that tonight, but I invite you to think about it. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, as Susan mentioned. But is this what you're seeing as well? And what troubles you about these trends as you think about them? And then how do you think about how this affects your ability and your peers' ability to compete? How does this affect your day-to-day success as a business and the kind of decisions you need to make as you're allocating scarce resources for your company to succeed and for you to serve your customers. Now, let's talk about the other side of the story, right? We've talked about the challenge and the need for change, but there are a lot of things happening, and the work of American Promise is a key part of that, but there's a bigger picture as well. So first, 75% of Americans are supportive of this kind of a direction, and it's not a single party. This is something that Democrats are seeing, Republicans are seeing, independents are seeing. And so there is definitely interest from both sides of the aisle and from citizens of all kinds, and again, increasingly businesses as well, that this is something that needs to be changed and we can change. And we'll talk about that solution, which is the amendment proposed by American Promise. The other side that I think is very encouraging, and Susan alluded to this, is this trend to focus on stakeholder capitalism. And so I think there is a role for companies to play here. So it's not simply a matter that if we can reduce the influence of politics and let companies do whatever they will, because companies also are stepping up and talking about a broader role they have to play in our society. And there have been some changes that have happened in the last year or two where companies are stepping forward both individually and in groups to talk about the broader role they're going to play, not just focusing only on their shareholders, but thinking more broadly about the role they play with the environment, with other members of society, as job creators, and so forth. And what we see over time, and frankly, I was surprised by this, but very quickly, people are noticing, citizens are noticing. And so in recent survey work done, looking at how people think about what companies are doing and seeing the extent to which they think that companies are promoting an economy that serves all Americans, that is allowing people to lead lives of meaning and dignity, and building the economy that allows us to succeed through hard work and creativity, more companies are aspiring to do this and making those public statements, and more citizens are seeing it and are believing that this is the direction we're going. And so this is part of what we want to help cultivate and accelerate, is to say, let's let those companies be able to do that work. We should hold them accountable to it, right? Holding organizations like mine and others to this broader purpose of not just shareholders, but also stakeholders, but make sure we've got an environment where that can be possible through limiting the role of political funding. And so this is the American Promise solution, an amendment to the Constitution. And I remember myself as I first got connected to this organization and learning about the problem and the challenge, and then learning about the proposed solution, I was asking the question, why an amendment? This seems like a big lift. And has this really been done before? And is this the right direction? And by the way, won't this take a long time? And in talking with the team, I've become a believer. There's a first part, and it goes back to the slide I showed on the Supreme Court cases, which is this is not some small challenge we're trying to address, right? We're talking about Supreme Court decisions that have been made that are really shaping this issue. And so a first issue is that a constitutional amendment is a permanent solution, right? A standalone reform is not going to be enough to move in the direction we need. And then the second thing that was interesting to me was the notion of precedence, that in fact, this has happened before in times in American history when big change has been needed, especially in the face of Supreme Court rulings. 8 times constitutional amendments have been passed. And so for me, that's a very important point as we think about what the work ahead of us might be. I mentioned before that there is support from American people for this direction. But the other thing that was helpful for me to think about was this is a long-term play, and it's not something that's just starting today. So in fact, American Promise has been working on this for several years. The vision is by 2026 for us to pass this amendment. And the work has been going on for a few years. And as we think about what's needed to make this happen, obviously there's a part about convincing the American people. And so thinking about in the towns and cities, getting support from the amendment from those groups, but also there are specific legal requirements around the number of senators and representatives who must support this and the number of states who must ratify it. And as you can see, when this work started out, if you go back 2010, there were very few folks who knew about this or were supportive of this kind of direction. American Promise has made extraordinary progress in the last several years. And this again was a data point that was surprising to me when I first got involved in this work. Is I was interested, I'd certainly been watching the issue of political spending and thinking about it, but I didn't know that there had been work in progress for several years. And then, as Susan mentioned, right, we're maybe looking to add another state to this list of 20 already, which I find quite compelling and exciting. You can see the number of towns that have supported this as well. And then a lot of support already in Congress and more work to do. But this is a long-term project. It's a project that American Promise has been working on for quite a while. There is increasingly momentum. And I think part of the goal of this conversation and conversation that hopefully this will lead to is to add the business voice to those conversations. And when we think about the vision of where we want this to go, again, it's not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans, it's about all of us. It's not just about citizens, it's not just about business leaders, it's all of us together. And so what we're really looking for is a representative democracy and a free marketplace. And these two working and meeting each other, because they do together enable us to get to the kind of society we're looking for. And for our economy, what we want is a business place where we as businesses compete based on the value we create in the marketplace. And so I think there is this vision of both a better democracy and a free marketplace, and the goal being to manage and limit political spending to enable both of those to come to pass. So as I mentioned, business leaders are important in this conversation. And it's been interesting for me thinking about this issue both as a citizen and as a leader of an organization. And then also, I've had conversations with at least a dozen of my colleagues, so folks in my networks who are CEOs of for-profits, of nonprofits, different types of organizations, and talking about the importance of the voice that we bring, because it's a different voice. There's a first part, which is we bring a skill set that can be useful here. So problem solving, critical thinking, very pragmatic approach to things. We need solutions that will work because we've got businesses to run and customers to serve, and that's just kind of our orientation, and we can use that kind of movement. There's a second piece, which is really cutting through the partisan divide. And so there are businesses of all types. There are businesses on both sides of the aisle, and many times this is a voice that can say, what I'm interested in is a good and productive economy, and it's not about political party. And then the thing that Susan and her colleagues have told me quite a bit about is the conversations with elected officials can change when there's a business voice brought in. And citizen voices are so critical, right? We've got to make sure that that voice is heard. And Susan mentioned the figures about the number of people who voted in this election. And I think that's very promising as we think about people getting active and engaged in our democracy. But there is also the business voice, which is a different perspective. And I think it does help for representatives, legal representatives, to hear, first and foremost, what business leaders believe. Because I think, frankly, business can be a group where people can make assumptions about what business leaders want and what businesses need. And it's important for them to hear it directly. But I think also as business leaders can step forward and help supplement the voice of citizens, it can help the congressional leaders and state leaders get the full picture of how should they think about this issue, why is it important, and what kind of solutions might we consider. And so as we think about, again, another example of a signing statement here on this slide, getting more of these voices and business leaders like me speaking in our own words. What kind of organizations are we running? What kind of challenges are we seeing? How do we think about this issue? How do we think about both the kind of democracy and the kind of economy we want, and what makes that possible? And then the importance of limiting political spending so that these huge dollars that we're seeing don't drown out the other things that we do to be successful, which is really about delivering value for customers. And so as we think about the steps to take, there are a couple specific ones. And in some ways, the question is, are you ready to join us and try and help make an impact? So the first is to sign the business statement of principle. And as I said, I've had conversations now with at least a dozen of my colleagues, and I've had interesting reactions. And I think just having the conversations is an important first step. And so as you and other business leaders think about this issue and continue to get educated about it and decide whether you're willing to play a role and what kind of role you might play. Some of the colleagues, I've got a couple of colleagues I talked to who signed the statement immediately. And so as I described what it was, talked about why I was involved and why I thought it was important, they both said, yep, send me the information. I did, and I look on the website and there they are. And so sometimes the conversation goes that way. There are some where I had talked with some folks and they said, I think this is critically important, absolutely. And one of my colleagues is an African-American gentleman who leads a nonprofit. He's based in Portland. And so with all of the excitement happening in Portland these last several months and so many of the other issues that he and his organization have been dealing with, he said, I think this is critical, but I can't put it on the top of my list. There's so many other things I'm grappling with. And I think it's important for us all to be mindful of the moment that we live in and the challenges that many individual citizens and business leaders are facing as well. And starting that conversation and listening well to them. And then I've got a third group of colleagues I've talked to who frankly have not been as aware of this issue. And so a lot of their comment was, wow, I didn't know that. Please send me the material so I can learn more, because I haven't been paying attention to money in politics. I've been paying attention to other things. And so again, there's a real value I think we can play in just sharing materials like this presentation to let folks know how important this is, so they can then, again, think about the two questions we asked. Does this align with their experience? And how do they think it's affecting their businesses? And then will they join and sign the statement? So the first step is to really sign the statement of principle and talk with colleagues about it. And then the second is to learn more about the network and sign up for the communications. So Susan and her team are putting together materials both to inform us all about these issues, but also to talk about the work that's happening and find more ways to get involved, because the business voice is critical. And if we all work together, we can help the team achieve their goal by 2026. So I'd say thank you again for joining tonight and for listening. Thank you for being interested in this important topic. And then hopefully many of you can use this presentation and similar materials and share it with your networks, because at least for myself, it's been helpful to get a vocabulary so that now I can understand how to name some of these challenges I've been seeing and thinking about, how to talk about them effectively, and then how to understand what the solution might look like, what the work of this amendment is, and then how we as business leaders can be helpful in trying to bring this amendment to pass. So thank you for your time. Please think about signing the business statement and then sign up for the communications from the National Business Network. And with that, I will stop this part of the conversation, and I look forward to continuing Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. As I knew you'd do a great job, and you exceeded what I expected. So thank you very much.